This episode is brought to you by Amazon. Sometimes the most painful part of getting sick is the getting better part. Waiting on hold for an appointment, sitting in crowded waiting rooms, standing in line at the pharmacy, that's painful. Amazon One Medical and Amazon Pharmacy remove those painful parts of getting better with things like 24/7 virtual visits and prescriptions delivered to your door. Thanks to Amazon Pharmacy and Amazon One Medical, healthcare just got less painful.
It is Ryan here, and I have a question for you. What do you do when you win? Like, are you a fist pumper, a woohooer, a hand clapper, a high fiver? If you want to hone in on those winning moves, check out Chumba Casino. Choose from hundreds of social casino-style games for your chance to redeem serious cash prizes. There are new game releases weekly, plus free daily bonuses. So don't wait. Start having the most fun ever at ChumbaCasino.com.
Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Hello, and thank you for listening to The History of World War II podcast, episode 501, The Other Crimean War. While Army Group Center and General Zhukov bloodied each other with little change in the battle lines, let's take a look at the battle over Crimea. Again, Stalin is impatient to have all enemy troops gone from his lands, but easier said than done. And as is my wont, I'm going to James Michener this subject by going back in time. But don't worry, we won't be there long, but a sense of perspective will help understand the Russians' desire to retake what had been taken from them. The Russians became concerned, or rather nervous, as touching the Crimean Peninsula in the 16th century. As the Tartars, descendants of the Mongol Golden Horde, would leave the peninsula and raid Russian lands, looting and kidnapping Russian people to then sell them into slavery. These incursions into Russian territory peaked in 1571, when a large Tartar army made its way to Moscow, taking thousands of prisoners and burning much of Tsar Ivan the Terrible's capital. Clearly, something had to be done. But it was not until May 1689 when Prince Vasily Golitsyn made his way to the northern entrance of the peninsula with 117,000 troops. But, much like 1941, there was an extreme lack of logistical support, and the would-be raid turned into a Russian slaughter, or rather, a slaughter of Russians. There was only one thing for it. Moscow swallowed its pride and hired foreign military officers for training and leadership. So, in May 1736, when 62,000 Russians went back to the Crimea, they were led by the General Count Burkhard Christoph von Munich. Not that the Tartars knew any of this, so when their fort at the northern entrance of the peninsula along the much smaller Perikop Peninsula was attacked, the Tartars were unconcerned. This had happened before. But the German Count executed one of the most basic maneuvers of military warcraft, something the illiterate Russians could handle. He made a fake against one wall while the real attack went to another. This would be a local Russian victory, but the larger Tartar problem was still there. Another successful attack was pulled off in 1737. This time, the Russian troops were led by Irish-born Count Peter Lacy. It was the beginning of the end of the Tartar menace. And truly underlining Russian dominance, in April 1783, Catherine the Great herself annexed the Crimean Khanate. Her lover, Prince Grigory Potemkin, was placed in charge of the peninsula, and he encouraged the Tartars to leave for Ottoman lands, and many of them did just that. Oh, the Ottomans would try one more time in a series of naval battles from 1788 to 1791. But the Russian Black Sea Fleet, of which the American John Paul Jones commanded a frigate, dominated the waters. Of course, what followed was the Crimean War from 1853 to 1856, with Russia on one side and the British, French, Ottoman Empire, and Sardinians on the other. Believe it or not, the latter were victorious. The victors, most of all Britain, demanded that Russia's Black Sea Fleet be reduced, and it was. Moving on, the Russians would leave the Great War before it ended, thanks to the Russian Revolution. But the point is, it was soon unclear as to who was in charge of the Crimea. Trying to answer that very question, a 33-year-old Tatar lawyer proclaimed that he was the president of the new Crimean People's Republic. This was just before Christmas, 1917. Today's episode is sponsored by Acorns. Acorns makes it easy to start automatically saving and investing so your money has a chance to grow for you, your kids, and your retirement. Well, it's a new year, but will there be a new you? Only about 8% of people stick to their resolutions, and one of mine, each and every year, is to be more knowledgeable in financial matters, specifically my financial matters. I've been with Acorns for the last 5 years, and I'm very happy with what they have to offer. I have several accounts, and again, am content to watch them all just grow. So download the app and take a look for yourself. Investing does not have to be intimidating. Acorns gives you small, simple steps to get you and your money on track. Acorns will recommend a diversified portfolio that fits you and your money goals. Remember, you do not need to be rich. Acorns lets you invest with the spare change you've got right now. So, as the new year is upon us, take some steps to benefit yourself. Remember, from Acorns, mighty oaks do grow. Grow your oak. Head to acorns.com/WW2 or download the Acorns app to start saving and investing for your future today. Paid client endorsement. Compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Compensation provided. Investing involves risk. Acorns Advisors, LLC, and SEC registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/WW2. This self-proclaimed president would not live long. Neither would thousands of other Bolsheviks, Ukrainians, Germans, and Tartars who all fought each other over the peninsula. Eventually, the Germans won, but then the war ended itself and Germany had to give up Crimea. Not that stopped the intrigue, as British and French ships full of German soldiers took control of the peninsula. They had their differences, of course, but none of them wanted the Bolsheviks in charge of Russia. Hence, a semi-war/civil war broke out, and control of Crimea was also an important question that had to be answered. The Civil War aspect of this fighting was the Russian Reds against the Russian Whites. The Reds were with Lenin, who backed the Bolsheviks. The Whites were made up of conservatives and right-leaning officers, but in the end, the Reds were simply better organized, and though it took them several years, they ended up on top, though the country was now mostly ruined. The Crimea itself had 75,000 murders during this time, most done by the Red security forces. But then Lenin dies in 1924, and in 1928, Stalin seems to be the new man, and he is so focused on forced collectivization of agriculture that he does not care about the local ethnic interests on the peninsula. In fact, his cruel policies towards the Tartars on the peninsula would continue until the outbreak of World War II. Speaking of which, when Operation Barbarossa was launched, the only land forces on Crimea was General Lieutenant Pavel Batov's 9th Rifle Corps of 2 rifle and 1 cavalry divisions. Batov was to work with the Black Sea Fleet to protect the peninsula, but especially the very built-up port of Sevastopol on the peninsula's southwest corner. Russia had spent much on this, and they want it protected. But in typical Russian fashion, at least during this part of the war, General Batov did not hear one single word from the fleet. There was no coordination. But even before Barbarossa, the great game was being played by Germany and Russia. One of the details of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact signed in August 1939 was that Soviet Russia would have Bessarabia within its sphere of influence. Much of Bessarabia then is occupied by Moldova today, on Romania's eastern border. Point is, after the 1917 revolution, Bessarabia broke away after being controlled by others for centuries, and then they joined into a union with Romania. But with the pact in his hand, Stalin ordered the Romanians out of Bessarabia. They did so, and then his troops moved in. But 5 months later, Romania would have a coup, and its new leadership signed an alliance with Nazi Germany. Suddenly, this region including Crimea, was under direct threat, at the very least, from German bombers. Fortunately for Soviet Russia, at least this newest ally of Germany's did not have much of a fleet, so an amphibious landing on the Crimea was possible, but unlikely. No more concerning to the Stavka, certainly after June 22, 1941, was if Turkey allowed Axis forces to pass through Turkish air or Turkish waters. So Batov's 9th Rifle Corps was repositioned to cover 2/3 of the peninsula's southern coast, from Yevpatoria at the 8 o'clock position to Kerch at the 3 o'clock position. And lastly, for now, Moscow decided that they did not want to limit themselves to just defending Crimea, it and its main port, Sevastopol, because they would use it to launch attacks at the Romanians and any other Axis forces that were along the Black Sea coast. Anything that would hopefully distract the Germans from their main attack. As for the Crimea itself, it was introduced to the war on the morning of June 22, 1941, before the sun rose, as bombers from Fliegerkorps 4 bombed Sevastopol. They would return occasionally, but clearly, the Germans' focus was for now on the mainland in western Ukraine. The question now for the Russians was, how far would the enemy be allowed to penetrate before they were turned around? Clearly, the Red Army's plans of stopping the Germans at the border had failed, but surely they would not reach the peninsula. As we have seen in previous episodes, the Black Sea Fleet did much to help Odessa along the coast, but besides bringing in reinforcements to the port, Vice Admiral Oktyabrski, in charge of the Black Sea Fleet, had his surface ships bombard the cities of Constanta and Sulina. Anything, again, to distract the enemy from their main plans. Besides this, Crimea's largest contribution early, during Barbarossa, was having some of its bombers from the Black Sea Naval Air Force raid the Ploesti oil fields in Romania. These were the wrong kind of bombers to attack because their carrying capacity was limited, and being 340 miles or 547 kilometers from Ploesti, they could only do so much damage. But there was one thing that the Russians would eventually, painfully, work out. Because of these very bombings, the peninsula was deemed by Berlin more dangerous than what it really was, and the Nazi warlord would want this problem removed. When Barbarossa began, Hitler focused on Moscow and Leningrad. As for the south, he told General Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt of Army Group South to destroy all Russian forces west of the Dnieper River in Ukraine, and the early capture of the Donetsk Basin was important for war industry. Crimea was not even mentioned, but its attacks on Ploesti would change that. Of course, what was different in Hitler's invasion in the east from that of in the west was his Master Plan East. Bringing in the SS and staying just behind the main battle lines, not only would the Jews be targeted, but also the Ukrainians, and in time, all Slavs. And once their numbers had been significantly reduced, and they were no more than slaves, German colonists would come over and Germanize the land. No staff officer mentioned Crimea during the planning of Barbarossa, but SS officer Reinhard Heydrich, the chairman of the Wannsee Conference that set up the details of the final solution of the Jewish question, he made plans. According to his notes, the Crimea would serve as a holiday spot for Germans. Also, there would be the planting of cotton and wheat. Supporting this, just 2 weeks after the invasion of the East commenced, Hitler said, "The beauties of the Crimea, which we shall make accessible by means of an autobahn, for us Germans, that will be our Riviera." And doing his part, right behind Army Group South, would be SS Gruppenführer Otto Ohlendorf's Einsatz Group D. It would be they ridding Nazi Germany of those pesky Russian civilians who were no more than an irritant now because, simply, they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Back to Vice Admiral Oktyabrski's air attacks on Ploesti, even though the attacks themselves were pinpricks, The same could be said of the Luftwaffe raids on Russia's naval forces on the peninsula. There was only one thing for it if that wasn't going to work: occupation. Thus, on July 23, 1941, just 10 days after the air raid on Ploesti, Hitler issued a supplement to Directive 33. It was to the point. Once Army Group South had taken Kharkov, a city in eastern Ukraine, thus indicating that area had been captured, the bulk of the infantry divisions will then occupy Ukraine, the Crimea, and the area of central Russia up to the Don. A few weeks later, another directive put more emphasis on taking Crimea. In other words, once the Dnieper River was crossed, Hitler wanted Rundstedt to send an overwhelming force to take and hold the Crimea. And as we have seen, while Ploesti was being harassed, but nothing more, Army Group South was devouring southern Russia. On August 12, 1941, the Battle of Uman was over. The Soviet 6th and 12th Armies were trapped and crushed, with the Russians losing 100,000 troops and that same number of prisoners, not to mention the 317 lost tanks. Additionally, the Soviet 9th and 18th Armies were able to retreat and cross the Dnieper River, and then blow the nearby bridges. To counter this, the 16th Panzer Division managed to capture the port city of Nikolaev to the northeast of Odessa. As this was the Black Sea Fleet's main construction and repair facility, this would weaken the Black Sea Fleet, and its being weakened would weaken Odessa, which fell on October 16th. Now that the port city had been lost, the Stavka not only increased the number of troops on Crimea, they gave it new leadership. What had been defending Crimea was General Batov's 9th Rifle Corps, again 2 infantry and 1 cavalry divisions. That was to be augmented with 2 more rifle divisions, 4 militia divisions, and the 5th Tank Regiment. All these forces now were to be under the command of General Colonel Fyodor Kuznetsov. Now, standing on the peninsula would be 95,000 troops, but, as we have seen time and time again, there would be too few pieces of artillery, or transports, or tanks. Though there was some compensation in that Kuznetsov was being given control of the Black Sea Fleet. Straight away, Kuznetsov needed the defense works along the 2 northern land bridges improved, yet many of his troops were still on the way, so he gathered up about 30,000 civilians and put them to work. Per the Stavka, in mid-August, the remaining citizens that had German lineage were gathered up and removed, taken to the Urals, and they would be there for the next 10 years. The question for those on Crimea now was, how would the enemy come at them? From the north, via the 2 land bridges, or perhaps an airborne invasion? Then there was always the threat of an amphibious landing. Yes, all these were possibilities, but how practical were they? 3 months earlier, German airborne personnel had been decimated while landing on Crete, to the point that Hitler would be gun-shy in using them ever again for a major operation. As for an amphibious landing, the Axis didn't have anything on the Black Sea to accomplish this. The Romanian fleet versus the Black Sea fleet, that wasn't even worth comparing. This left a land attack from the north by General Oberst Eugene Ritter von Schauber's 11th Army. Though the peninsula now had its new leadership for its 95,000 troops, that did not exclude not being able to parse out bullshit from intelligence reports intercepted from the enemy, and this would be Crimea's undoing. On August 18th, Kuznetsov was told that counterintelligence picked up the Germans' attack plan, which would consist of amphibious landings supported by an airborne attack. Again, these were beyond the Axis abilities in this area at this time, but that did not stop the Stavka from giving Kuznetsov orders. He was to disperse his troops all over the island. And as the saying goes, to defend everything is to defend nothing. By the time he put 40,000 of his men along the southern coast and another 25,000 inland scattered around, this only left him 30,000 troops to defend the northern approaches, and one of those at Perekop, The western of the two land bridges was 7,000 men from the 156th Rifle Division, led by Colonel Alexander Delenin. Fortunately, 10 T-34s and 56 T-37 tankettes were on their way. Hopefully, the Germans wouldn't come too soon. On August 30th, the 11th Army crossed the Dnieper. During the second week of September, 11th Army then carried out a breakout attack, leaving the Soviet 9th Army that was trying to stop it to retreat to the east in some haste and a lot of confusion. The way to the Crimea was open. Greetings, everyone, from Central Virginia. So I just want to say hi to some people who've come on board and who have donated. Thank you very much. Let's see here. My latest member is that Nicole Younger from Webster, New York. Sorry about that. And as far as donations, we have Mateos Dirks and Christopher Matthews. Christopher, I got your email. Sorry I haven't replied yet. He thought I was going to be doing something big for the 500th episode, which I guess I should have. I don't know. I thought about it, but I got a gazillion things going along. I'm sure everybody does this time of year. So if I drop the ball and let you down, Christopher, I'm very sorry. Maybe I'll come up with something in spring, but right now I'm just trying to get these out as fast as I can. So anyways, thank you to everybody. I hope you have a safe, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. Just be good to each other, and that will take care of so many of our problems. So take care, everyone.